Hello all, hope you're doing well today. I recently saw Elon Musk was on the Joe Rogan podcast and he made an allegory of the British people as hobbits in J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. He states that the boundaries of the Shire have been breached and now the people of the Shire are facing a level of carnage that they just have never been prepared for.
These lovely sort of small towns in England, Scotland, Ireland, they've been sort of living their lives quietly. They're like hobbits, frankly. So it's in fact, J.R.R. Tolkien based the hobbits on people he knew in small town England because they were just like lovely people who like to, smoke their pipe and have nice meals and everything's pleasant. The hobbits in the Shire. The reason they've been able to enjoy the Shire is because hard men have protected them from the dangers of the world. But since they have almost no exposure to the dangers of the world, they don't realize that they're there. Until one day, 1,000 people show up in your village of 500 out of nowhere and start raping the kids.
Strong words from Elon Musk there. And as you might imagine, his comments have set the cat amongst the pigeons, from the chai latte sipping prep devotees who believe modern Britain is a utopian success story, to country dwellers such as this. I actually live in a small English village. It's total codswallop what Elon Musk is saying. We're not hobbits under siege. We're ordinary people. How rude to patronise us like this. It's fear-mongering, dressed up as folklore. Now, one could counter this by displaying some of the carnage we've seen from some of our new arrivals recently. On your screen is a series of events that happened in only 1 week recently. The problem with this sort of stuff is if you lean liberal, you're just going to say, well, yeah, but you're just cherry picking because you're evil and racist. And if you're not, you're just going to already understand this stuff. So it's basically preaching to the converted. Ergo, I think there's much more meat and vitality in exploring the symbology of the Lord of the Rings motifs and how that applies to us in modern Britain. Before I begin, just a word to the Tolkien purists. I am aware that he said we should be cautious about reading his work as allegory. That includes the comments of Elon Musk and anybody else. However, I think it should also be said that Tolkien himself did point out that Lord of the Rings was a subconscious Catholic allegory, which tells us that deep myth can work on a deeper level than we often understand. Not to mention, true mythology that's rooted in the sacred, like true art, sort of leaves the individual and becomes part of the collective consciousness over time. It's rooted, if you like, in the DNA of a given people, time and space. So with this in mind, dear friends, let us venture on into the wonder of the Shire and the depths of Mordor, discovering what it means for us today. Now, for starters, there is no doubt that the Shire is a representation of archetypal, idyllic, pre-industrialised countryside England, rooted in the West Midlands Shires where Tolkien grew up. Yet, where I may disagree a touch with Musk's comments is where he implies that because the Shire is idyllic, the people are too. Now, I think we can all see there's an innocence to the Hobbit, but when you look into the goings-on of the Shire, we see they're imperfect, they're sometimes arrogant, they're gossipy, they can be prideful, but they can also be deeply courageous and brave. We should remember that hobbits aren't the elves in Rivendell with their sort of moralistic, ethereal perfection. There is something deeply grounding and humane about the hobbit. And this is the wonder of the Hobbit in many ways. Yes, he has a sort of flawed simplicity, but it's that which allows him to align with nature as it is, to align with a deeper and more powerful order, well represented by the natural magic of the Shire. As I've explored in videos before, when you look at the house of a Hobbit, it's completely at peace with its surroundings. It is not at war with nature. And this isn't because it's in a utopia, but because it's part of a subtle, natural and sacred order which makes life meaningful, completely opposed to the mechanization and ugliness and bureaucratic control of the industrial world represented by Mordor. The seductive power of Mordor is all too much for man trapped in his three-dimensional Hamlet-like consciousness. He's all too easily overruled by it. This is why the wizard Gandalf, who strongly represents the old pagan god Odin, who acts as a sort of guardian to the Shire, knows that it must be the hobbit to carry the ring because of their natural innocence and simple-mindedness. And this leads us to the present interpretation of Lord of the Rings, where England, along with other European countries, are the archetypal Shire, under attack from a vast globalist mechanism, throwing in new people from all over the world, desacralising everything, and turning everything that was once pure and natural into a mechanical and industrial process. This in turn has led to the plethora of stories in the liberal media about how conservatives or the right or even the far right don't understand Lord of the Rings. It's really a story about tolerance and inclusion, don't you know? And then you get the rightist outlets responding to that, speaking of how the left think Lord of the Rings is racist. Ha 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 ha. Really the sort of milquetoast civnats that are probably a bit frightened of what people really feel when they watch and engage with Lord of the Rings. And that's because Tolkien did construct Lord of the Rings as a sort of English mythology. He did that consciously, and that taps into many of the key themes we speak about on this channel, what I call the non-rational: homeland, sacred order, belonging, kinfolk, and spirituality. All the things the modern world sees as irrelevant. And this leads us to the controversial allegory some have made of the orc as the dangerous, rapacious foreigner coming into the idyllic Shire and attacking the people there who are relatively defenceless. Of course, the globalist machine, which would be Mordor, oversees all of this. We know this notion has heavily entered the collective consciousness, as when Amazon took over Lord of the Rings and released the Rings of Power, they did their best to make the orcs seem sympathetic, so they're obviously playing on the motif. Now personally I believe all of this centres around an oversimplified reading. You could align immigration with the mission of Mordor, if you will, but I think it's a bit deeper than that. My reading of the orc is something more like the modernist standardised man who's divorced from home, spirit and organic culture, a pure product of the Mordor machine. He's from both everywhere and nowhere. The mass man who's set out into what's left of the deindustrialised world to bring it under the power of the modernist structures of globalism. It's the dark soul of industrial alchemy brought to life, that which seeks to boil down everything sacred and unique into the spiritless, deracinated mush of the identityless global citizen. And of course, immigration is a tool that the powers that be will use to flatten out humanity, to destroy all sacred tradition and uniqueness, and make us all one and the same, standardised, opinionless, replicable. As the great English Orthodox priest, Father Spyridon Bailey, points out, the rich variety of cultures and nationalities is part of the way man's existence expresses the beauty of God in whose image we are made. Satan desires to destroy these differences, reduces to a meaningless whole in a false unity that only denies the dignity of man. It should be remembered that Tolkien was a devout Catholic with traditionalist leanings. I mean by that he was more interested in the pre-Vatican II Catholic Church, not the traditionalist in the way I would normally use it in the spiritual and philosophical tradition. But there was significant crossover between someone like Tolkien and a traditionalist spiritualist like myself, both, if you like, right-wing romantics as I call it, not so interested in Thatcherism and hard economics. There's an ugliness to that, more interested in sacred order, way of life, discipline and integrity towards that order. So we can see in Tolkien a traditionalist streak which sees cultures as sub-creations, reflections of divine creativity that are rooted, bounded and organic, not absorbed in the modern standardised ideologies of the age. In essence, like many a traditionalist, you could say that someone like Tolkien did admire the variety we find in creation, but would distrust the modern celebration of interchangeability, finding that deracinating and dehumanizing. Tolkien's critique of modernity through Mordor isn't so much about inclusion and exclusion in modern neo-Marxist framings, but more about the loss of form, tradition, and telos. So globalization, mass immigration and cultural disintegration are all very much valid readings of Tolkien. They all play into the broader message. However, as I'm so eager to point out on the channel, we have to go a few steps deeper than that and realize that what allowed these things to happen in the first place was a fracturing within ourselves, within our own spiritual tradition. Now, we can see that spiritual hierarchy is replete throughout Lord of the Rings, specifically in Rivendell, which is almost at the very top. It's a place of grace and light, a place where the soul can rest and reform itself. It's the keeper of tradition. We see this replicated in the great European cathedral, the great columns going up to the sky where light breaks in, again symbolizing the divine structure which orders our lives in the day-to-day as well as on the civilizational level. Yet how many of us connect with sacred order through our tradition in this day and age? How many of us potentially even can in the diocese we have? How many of us sit in the pews in deep contemplation, in silence, as the great force of being overtakes us, showing us that our day-to-day woes really are nothing in the grand scheme of existence? It's not to say you can't have mystical experience in this day and age. You may come across it during quiet contemplation in nature. You may come across it so long as you haven't dulled the senses with excess amounts of alcohol when you're singing Christmas hymns in church and the song travels up to the rafters and then back down. The Holy Spirit takes it through all of your chakras as your being explodes into the beauty of song. Younger folks too tend to like to take shortcuts, and they can do so to the mystical via experiences with psychedelics, although those experiences can be deeply haphazard and mercurial. Yet what's important for us in this video is while people can have mystical experiences which introduce them to sacred order in this day and age, they're still fragmented reflections of the great whole. After all, in the true traditional understanding, the whole of life is sacred. When everything is aligned with sacred order, we're in harmony. Not one action is divorced from it at any time. And this is exactly what modernity corrupts from the very inside out. And this is why today nothing is truly built for the sacred. Nothing is built for our divine sacred order which unifies us as a tradition and a people. Instead, we have buildings like this. This was going viral on social media yesterday. It's a new train station somewhere in England, and as you can see, it's so incredibly bland and ugly, you wonder why on earth people bother spending money on it. Yet through the traditionalist and Tolkien understanding, we can see that such architecture comes from a soul that's completely arid. There is simply no need for beauty anymore in the modern world. It's seen as totally irrelevant because the soul is seen as totally irrelevant. What matters is practicality, minimizing costs in building, and maximizing efficiency and productivity. And buildings like this really are the spiritual children, no pun intended, of the revolt against the traditional world. We've seen this push towards mass equalitarianism. Even the ideas of beauty themselves were heavily usurped in the 20th century by radical leftist movements. Now, one of the reasons our friends despise beauty so much is because they correctly observe that it implies a hierarchy in the world, a hierarchy they felt was unjust and led to oppression, so therefore had to be destroyed. But what these people didn't realise, because they were spiritually desolate due to the fracture that happened before them, is that beauty and this hierarchy that it implies isn't a choice, it's an innate factor of being itself. Now, because we're divorced from the sacred and the hierarchy it implies, we try to flatten everything out, make everything equal. That seems like the moral thing to do to modern man. But this means, of course, that we simply replace beauty with function. The result is that things work, but nothing really speaks to the soul anymore. Nothing really matters. And that means that the loss of sacred space externally mirrors the loss of the sacred within us. And this brings us full circle. It's why the hobbits, simple as they are, could allow sacred order to function around them in the shape of the Shire. They may not be as intelligent as the mechanical men of modernity, but they're not nearly as corrosive either. After all, it's that mechanical industrialism that's now eating alive the heart of the Shire itself. And this, to my mind, is why people identify so strongly with Lord of the Rings and the Shire at the moment. It's because they can see that archetypal, idyllic, symbolic and real England is being eaten alive by globalization and its many tentacles in the form of mass immigration, multiculturalism, materialism and the rendering of everything to the economy. In essence, we can tell that the sacred is now under deep and sustained attack, but we've lost the language and the knowledge to know how to defend it because we're fractured in our own tradition. But as I always say, as things get more chaotic and dark and dangerous, and they will, it offers the opportunity for us to re-engage with these things, to go back to our roots in the depths of the darkness and rise once again with a true understanding of what our tradition really is and what it's for. As always, these are just my views. Do let me know what you think down below in the comments. You can also buy my course on traditionalism if you're interested in that. I recently completed one. I'll put it in the comments for you. Or join the Substack. We've got a monthly conversation coming up this weekend, as well as a sister channel on spiritual and personal transformation. Other than that, do subscribe to this channel if you're new, and enjoy the rest of your day.